Well, I'll try to enliven you so that you'll at least start getting hungry. Let me thank Susan for putting this together and for all of you for your persistence. I want to start with a very simple point, and that is that myths move people and they often immobilize people. And the longest standing myth is that there is an Americas, and it's an homogeneous geopolitical, demographic, social, and economic entity that was discovered by Christopher Columbus. Though, of course, when he arrived, there may have been 100 million people here that thought maybe they had discovered it first. Most myths as large as that usually start from the outside. And it started, obviously, from Europe, that looked to the myth of the Americas as a way to rejuvenate an old Europe, to think about a new world. And that myth was continued by the United States for a strategic purpose, precisely to keep Europe out or any imperial powers out. And those myths have worked over time in different ways, although in the 20th century, the disintegration pressures were at least as great as the integration pressures in the Americas. The high point of the Americas actually occurred right here in the city in 1994 with the Summit of the Americas in December, when for the first time all of the Americas, except for Cuba and Haiti, were democratic. They had moved towards opening their economies to trade, and they proclaimed an objective of a free trade area of the Americas within a decade. That would have solidified the myth and created in Americas in reality. But of course, that didn't happen. That fell apart since then for a variety of reasons. I think first, the United States was not really interested in negotiating solely with Argentina and Brazil on a free trade area of the Americas, nor was Brazil and Argentina interested in negotiating. I think, secondly, Venezuela and Alba began to play a very strange role, and Brazil, over time, began to see what it had long seen, which is this was the moment for Brazil to play the role in South America in a preeminent way that the United States had played it in the past, and to encourage a further division between South America and North America. The U.S. largely conceded that to Brazil for three reasons. It's conceded South America to Brazil for three reasons. Not entirely, and obviously we have very close and important relations, as we've just heard, with Colombia, even the Brazilian ambassador, with Chile, with Peru. But by and large, Brazil is playing the central role with UNASUR and others in developing and working closely with all of the countries of South America, and the U.S. has accepted that. It's accepted it for three reasons. First is we are in the middle of a religious war in the United States. We are struggling over some fundamental philosophical issues about the nature and purpose of governance, about the role of government in the lives of women's bodies and same-sex marriages. And these issues are polarizing the debate so much that we can't make easy decisions on budget or on any other issues at all, for that matter. I think, secondly, at the same time, we are faced with all of the world's crises because, after all, from a military standpoint, we are the only country with genuine global reach. And therefore, we're called upon to play a role for every humanitarian and strategic disaster in the world. And Washington can't see past the crisis of the moment to what is important. And thirdly, we also see Asia rising and we see Latin America marginalized. For all of those reasons, for the first time, there is really a different North and a different South America. If you look statistically, obviously half of the population of the Americas is in North America, the other half largely in South America. If you look at GDP, you will see that as well as in trade, and I just picked up my wrong page, so you'll just have to hold for 1 second. If you look at GDP and trade, roughly 75 to 80% of all of the trade in the Americas is in North America, not in Mercosur, not in South America. It's not just the size and the disproportion between North America and South America, it's the coherence of the two continents. And you can see that in one simple indicator of integration, which is take the exports within and to a region as a percentage of their exports to the world. If you look at that, the United States and North America, roughly 56% of our exports to the world is to each other.
You're talking basically NAFTA,
North America, that's right.
but it's the North, yeah, the North.
North America are three countries, the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. If you look at the three countries of North America, roughly 56% of their exports to the world are with each other. If you look at Mercosur, it's roughly about 19 to 22%. In fact, it's actually declined since the beginning of Mercosur, which may suggest that it's not doing quite as well as many people purport it to be, because if the purpose of a common market or a customs union or a regional trade area is to encourage trade among its partners, they're moving in the wrong direction. But if you're looking at, therefore, the overall Americas from a trade perspective, from South America, and you see that 75% of the market is in North America, one would expect you'd want to tap into that market, although that's not happening except for a few countries. If you're looking at all of the Americas from North America and you see only about 20% of the market in South America, you might look elsewhere. And that's what we've done, of course. From the perspective of North America, we have looked elsewhere. And I want to just give you three snapshots to understand where we're coming from and where we ought to go. In 1994, the three countries of North America constituted roughly 30% of the world product. It actually was the largest region of the three major regions in the world: East Asia, European Union, and North America. In 2001, we had 36% of the world product. We had accelerated our growth as a region, and in terms of trade, we tripled trade, quintupled foreign direct investment. In 2011, we have fallen down to 25%. But actually, at this moment in time, the three great regions of the world are at the same starting point. Each, East Asia, the European Union, and North America each have 25% of the world product right now. And so therefore, the question is, who's going to win this race? Again, if you look at the three snapshots, the first question we ought to ask ourselves in North America is what happened? Why did we succeed so dramatically in 7 years and peak in the year 2001? And there are several reasons for that. I think the first and most important is 9/11. 9/11 lifted restrictions on our border higher than the NAFTA barriers that had been dismantled. I think the second was China. Will Rogers used to say, even if you're on the right road, if you sit down, you're going to be run over, and we were all run over by China. I think thirdly, despite the dramatic increase in trade over the previous 7 years, and 85% of that trade is going by road, we built not one new road, not any infrastructure. Indeed, we can't even think of infrastructure at a national, let alone a continental basis. And so it's not a surprise that there were delays even before the 9/11 barriers went up. I think number four is we violated NAFTA on the most fundamental provisions regarding trucking for 15 years, and we still have not fully implemented our agreement on NAFTA that would allow Mexican trucks into the States, and we put all kinds of additional restrictions with regard to, and fees with regard to Canada. Fifth, we never really carried through the kinds of reforms that would have permitted NAFTA to be the foundation on which to build a North American continental market. Mexico didn't do it on energy. The United States' views of Mexico over the last 5-6 years as a result of violence and all of the issues that Roberto Salinas talked about have turned us away from Mexico. And Canada itself is really not focused on Mexico in any positive way as well. 6, we tried, President Bush tried, with the Security and Prosperity Partnership to build on it. He made very little progress. They decided to focus on regulatory harmonization. And his Secretary of Commerce, Carlos Gutierrez, chaired the committee, and he said, yes, if we're going to move forward on trade issues, we're going to have to harmonize our regulations. And you know what? I'd like to start with Cheerios. Him being a former CEO of Kellogg's, knew that he had to close his factory down in order to insert a couple of ingredients to export Cheerios to Canada, close it down again for the US, close it down again for Mexico. Really, can't we agree on one regulation on Cheerios? Stephen Harper, Prime Minister of Canada, said, I want the second priority, jelly beans. This is a favorite candy of Stephen Harper, and so he put that on the agenda. Well, here we are, 8 years later, and we don't have a regulation on jelly beans or on Cheerios. Indeed, of all of the practical, incremental challenges that face our 3 countries in North America, whether it's on the borders, whether it's on environment, whatever the issue is, we have made almost no progress, unless you measure progress by the number of bureaucratic meetings, in which case there's been tremendous progress, but no results. Why not? It's actually very easy. Look at the trucking issue. Look at softwood lumber. Whenever there's a special economic interest at stake, the president is not going to give up on that special interest in the absence of a compelling interest, which takes me to the question of where do we go from here. I think, first of all, we heard the case for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and I encourage you to read Barbara's book, which she co-authored. It's an excellent book. But if you read it closely, and I have, I come away with slightly different conclusions. My first conclusion is this is a sideshow. 82% of the GDP and trade of the TPP countries is in North America. It's not in Brunei and Singapore and Australia and New Zealand. And therefore, we have it backwards. Instead of adding those 2 countries on at the last minute, we should start with those 2 countries. Indeed, if you look also at the Transatlantic Partnership, the same applies. We export twice as much to our 2 neighbors than the entire European Union. We've got it backwards. I think, secondly, it's not feasible. I don't believe the U.S. Congress is going to trade away the remaining protections for trade with 8 tiny countries that represent 1/7 the GDP of Canada and Mexico. And if you think all of this is going to be done at the same time, the TPP and the Transatlantic Partnership and maybe North American integration, I ask you to focus for a moment on the Panama and Colombia trade agreements, which took us 8 years to negotiate and ratify. And they are trivial as compared to this. So for all of those reasons, I think this is a good book. I recommend it to you. But I think the answer is in this book, The North American Idea, where we ought to start. Absolutely. It's the important book because despite popular mythology about the importance of China, we export twice as much to Mexico as to China. Our 2 largest markets in the world are Canada and Mexico. Our 2 largest sources of energy imports are Canada and Mexico. The largest source of immigration, which is really transforming our identity, is Mexico. We know that. And we are beginning to change as a country, demographically, socially, but our political leaders haven't caught up. They're trying desperately to get caught up right now, but they are stumbling very badly. Now, if I were to talk about U.S. policy to the hemisphere, I would want to touch on three issues: Cuba, drugs, and Andean democracy, and the adjustments that are needed. But I won't do that now. I'll be glad to do that in questions. Instead, I want to focus on specific proposals of what do we do about North America, because I think this is central to America, central to the United States. And I think it's also central to the Americas overall if we succeed, and central also if we fail. I think we need to start with an idea, a compelling idea, that says that U.S. leadership in the 21st century requires us to adjust our power to our principles, and the principle of reciprocity and partnership is fundamental to that. And that compelling idea of thinking of a North American community in which all three countries are contributing to genuine mutual challenges, the most fundamental one being how do you narrow the income gap between Mexico and northern neighbors, is absolutely critical to the United States, to Mexico, to Latin America as a whole. We can start by asking our three ministers of transportation to come up with a single plan for transportation and infrastructure, a continental plan. Roads, railroads, not just local, not just national. Think of it as a continent. Think about new trade corridors. I think, secondly, we need to create a seamless market. If the single biggest stimulus to our economy and the three economies is to actually homogenize the marketplace. That means that a merchant in Chicago should be able to sell his goods as easily in Monterrey, Mexico, as in San Francisco. We have a long way to go from there. The place to start is with a common external tariff. That would eliminate customs on the border, allow our people on the border to focus on terrorism and drugs, and allow goods to go forward, allow us to eliminate transaction costs in a manner that would generate and eliminate rules of origin tax, which ranges from $40 to $400 billion a year, according to different estimates. This would stimulate the economy absolutely incredibly. And the fund that would come in from the common external tariff, which would be roughly $45 to $50 billion a year, should go into a North American investment fund whose purpose is to fund the infrastructure for all of the continent overall. If we succeed in that, in narrowing that income gap, then we have a formula that would be easy to extend to Central America and to the Caribbean, which are the next logical places. And if you succeed in that, then everybody in South America will be knocking on the door of the Americas again. If you get a formula that will work, if you get one that fails, we will remain two divided continents. There is much else that we should be doing, but it really comes back to the idea we need our leaders to talk about not buying American products, but buying North American products. Because what's special about North America, and qualitatively different from our trade with any other region in the world, is roughly 25 to 40% of the products we import from our neighbors is made up of content that we sell to them. What does that mean? It means we're no longer trading products. We're making them together, and making them together make them both more competitive and make us more competitive vis-a-vis Asia and elsewhere. When we get North American integration working, Asia and Europe will pay attention. And negotiating at that moment in time is the moment to do it. We have to get the sequence correct. But the essence of North America and of all of the Americas, the essential problem remains asymmetry, unevenness, imbalance in power. It's always been there. It's always made impossible partnership in actuality, though it's always been present in rhetoric. And so ultimately, if we want in Americas a myth that really lives, a relationship with Latin America, a development that occurs and lifts all of the people of the Americas, we have to address the issue of asymmetry. And the best way to start is in North America, with three countries around the table, rather than dual bilateral committees, U.S. and Canada, U.S. and Mexico. In 1958, when the European countries got together and proclaimed in a treaty solidarity for the purpose of promoting a European Union, they had an idea, a powerful idea. And of course, that idea emerged from a war, a very different circumstance than exists in the Americas. But in comparison, if you look at the preamble of the North American Free Trade Agreement, it reads as if it was written by Lily Tomlin, who once said, "Together we are in this alone." I think the answer for the U.S., the answer for North America, the answer for all of the Americas is a recognition that finally we can be together in this together. Thank you.